response. I have lots of sandwiches in the back. We did not have sandwiches last week, and we had some requests for them, so they're there, so please eat them. Y'all ate them before, there were only 3 left. Anyway, we're so glad you're here, and we're so glad to have Taryn Sternitsky to talk with us tonight. This was her social studies project that she went to state with, and she's so proud. And she's going to talk to us about the Chautauqua and about her grandfather's property, which is where the Chautauqua Hotel happens to be. If you'll look over here, we have new pictures. I don't know if I even got to show you these. They came this morning. These are new pictures, and they show the Chautauqua Hotel at the bottom. So these are just a true gift, and we're so glad to have them. Glenda Pipes brought them. So I'm going to turn the program over to you and get right behind you.
Hello, can everybody hear me? Even y'all in the back?
Yeah.
Okay.
No
Just wanted
answers,
to
but-
make everyone was accounted for. Okay. Well, anyways, my name is Taryn Sternitsky, and I'm a freshman at Ruston High School. I was first introduced to the Louisiana Chautauqua as a child in my grandparents' home. I grew up admiring a mural painted in the foyer of their home that depicted a collaboration between an artist and my Nana of what the Chautauqua would have looked like in its heyday. I was drawn to the beautiful mural at first because it included a painting of myself playing as a child with my family at the Chautauqua. I enjoyed hearing my Nana and Pops sharing the mural with visitors who would stop by and explain to them the significance of the Chautauqua. It was fascinating to see their awe at hearing and seeing the mural, and I would love to get to point out myself in the mural. I'll do that at the end, so sorry. I later learned that their home was built on the site of what was the Chautauqua Springs Hotel. My cousins and I grew up playing in the old well from the hotel, which is now filled in and located in the side yard. If you are not familiar with the Chautauqua, it was an adult education movement in the United States that showcased various traveling shows, educational speakers, religious education, concerts, and plays. They quickly spread and grew in rural American towns. The original Chautauqua co-founder, John Vincent, said, "Chautauqua is an idea embracing all things of life, art, science, society, religion, patriotism, and education." He wanted to take people and make them new, more intelligent, and thoughtful. The Louisiana Chautauqua was dedicated to these ideas, pleasure, and culture after Maddie H. Williams, also known as the mother of the Chautauqua, presented the idea at one of the Louisiana Chautauqua assemblies. In 1889, the Louisiana Educational Association voted to establish a Louisiana Chautauqua just north of Ruston. The Louisiana Chautauqua was founded in 1892 after the Chautauqua movement began in New York State as a summer retreat for training of Sunday school teachers. It was immediately widened to include academic subjects, music, art, humanities, and physical education. Ruston was chosen as the ideal location for the Chautauqua because of its breathtaking nature, peaceful setting, shade, trees, and hilly landscape. This area also offered some relief from the scorching southern Louisiana heat, as well as natural springs, which were thought to have healing powers. In 1891, the Louisiana Educational Association founded the Louisiana Chautauqua on the outskirts of Ruston, but the Chautauqua did not open to the public until 1892. When the Chautauqua was beginning, Ruston already had a small college called Ruston College, an opera house, and other cultural offerings, which would soon blossom and grow because of these exciting new summer events the Chautauqua would offer. The Louisiana Chautauqua was much like a summer camp that offered a mixture of education, religion, and recreation. Some families would come to hear certain speakers, so with the shorter stay, would choose to stay at the hotel, while other families who would come and stay all summer chose to stay in the cottages, which were built for longer stays. The large two-story hotel, named the Chautauqua Springs, was built soon after the cottages and included an outdoor pavilion that could hold up to 2,000 guests. A single bed for an adult in the hotel was $25 a month, and a family rate was $20 a month for adults and $10 for children under 12. Teachers were given a discount of $15 a month to stay at the hotel. A railroad station was later built nearby, and special trains starting in New Orleans and passing through Jackson, Mississippi, brought people to Ruston in great numbers and filled the Chautauqua to its capacity. The people were transported the 2 miles from the train station to the grounds by a carriage. Horses could be hired, and season tickets on horse-drawn wagonettes made scheduled runs. As the Chautauqua grew, 2 buildings were added, one for music and another one for a science curriculum. The Chautauqua movement quickly spread throughout the United States, which led to 45 other states starting their own Chautauquas. These small-town Chautauquas offered lectures, music, and plays. People would travel from all over to come and learn as the popularity of the Chautauquas increased. The people who attended the classes were inspired by some of the greatest public speakers, prominent politicians, and religious leaders of their time. One of the speakers at the Chautauqua, Louisiana Chautauqua, was William Jennings Bryan, who was by far one of the most well-known, and was a 3-time Democratic nominee for president. The Louisiana Chautauqua was open and running for 12 years, 1892 through 1904. The Great Depression was the end of most Chautauquas. In 1905, the Louisiana Chautauqua went bankrupt and closed. The buildings and grounds began to deteriorate. After that, promoters brought traveling roadshows to the facilities as a source of entertainment for the community until the 1920s. There was hope for the land, though. In 1922, Thomas L. and Maggie Hodges James purchased the Chautauqua land and added an additional 75 acres for a total of 90 acres. Together with their husband, Maggie renovated the abandoned property into a beautiful sanctuary. They created a family garden, imported many exotic plants, and named it Tumble Lodge, as a combination of their names, Tom and Maggie. After Tom and Maggie died, the T.L. James Company took over the management and maintenance of Tumble Lodge in 1964. Trot Hunt, great-grandson of James, bought Tumble Lodge in 2000 and made plans to develop the land into a restricted, upscale subdivision and tree preservation. Soon afterwards, the Christ Community Church relocated to Tumble Lodge in 2004 and was renamed the Bridge Community Church. What remains today? The Chautauquas have been one of the most influential contributions to education in this country. Although you find a quiet and peaceful scene today, the Chautauqua played a major part in Louisiana's educational and cultural advancement during a period of significant change. This influence from the Louisiana Chautauqua can be seen today in the form of the Louisiana Tech University. Ruston's support for the Chautauqua was instrumental in the creation of Tech in 1894, when it was at its greatest popularity. You can also still see remnants of Maggie James's azaleas and camellias. Her sequoias, crepe myrtles, and bamboo are still visible among the southern pines, magnolias and white oaks as you drive or stroll through Tumble Lodge estates. The old well that was used for the hotel can still be seen. It is located in my grandfather's yard. He incorporated the old well into his current landscaping, and his house is built on the site where the old hotel once stood. Several artifacts were found that belonged to the hotel when the grounds were excavated for building and landscaping his house. My grandmother donated these items to the Lincoln Parish Museum, where you can go see them today. Some of the last of the Chautauquas that closed down in the 1930s are now being reopened and revived. They have even started having a new traveling group which travels to cities across the country bringing reenactors to teach and for entertainment. In closing, I would like to thank Margaret Emery for sharing her information with me for my project. She has encouraged me and helped inspire my interest in Louisiana Chautauqua. I have learned so much through visiting the Lincoln Parish Museum, and I would hope that anyone who has not yet visited would make a plan to stop by and see all of the wonderful history it holds. I have my project board here. Okay. Where you can get a closer look at some of the old photos of the Chautauqua, the hotel, the wagonette, the pavilion, and some of the visitors. I also have photos of the mural that is painted in my grandparents' home, as well as some of the artifacts found at the old hotel site. Thank you.
I'm so proud of her. She worked so hard, and she did come on many occasions to get information.
Yeah, I had to do this for a social studies project in 8th grade, so last year, and I decided to do it on Louisiana Chautauqua because it felt so close to home for me. And, well, at school, I placed first, and then I went to regionals, which was located on Louisiana Tech, and we placed first in that division too, and so I went to state next. And state's pretty tough, if you couldn't guess, but I actually placed 5th at state, so.
Very good. You're first in our book. Show them your picture in the mural.
Okay, so this is me in the mural. I don't know if anyone can see, maybe. I mean, if you want later on, you can come take a closer look. And it's really pretty. You should come see it sometime. But I have, and I don't know if anyone can see this, but this is me pointing at myself. Me pointing at myself in the mural. And then we took some pictures over here of the mural and we cut it out for like cardstock or whatever. And I used that in my presentations, and it really shows you what it would look like with the pavilion, I think, over here, and the hotel's right there, and the well, and the wagons that would come back and forth. That's the pavilion, and this is the train. And then we have some artifacts right here, some old nails that were found when they excavated. And then some old, like, china they would use to eat. And I think these were donated by my grandma. They were donated by my grandma to the museum, and yeah. So thank you, everybody.
When she came the first time, we went upstairs to, I call it the secret room, and there was a box with the grandmother's name, and all these wonderful artifacts were in it. But when I first was hired by Billy Green, your grandmother called me to come out there, and I went out for a visit, and they showed me the murals. That's been, 6 or 7 years ago. It was just amazing. They did such a nice job. And you did a wonderful job, and I'm so proud of you. Very, very nice. I'm going to turn the program over now to Miss Mary Ann, and I'm going to help her get this down so Wesley can get his information ready.
All right, you did such a good job.
Thank you.
Wonderful. I'm Mary Ann Woods, and I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker. And he is a marvelous historian. In my first life, I met him at the Ruston Police Department. Lake Claiborne has a wonderful job there. And with his history and all that he's been through, he has got a good program to interest you today, and we appreciate you coming. Come on.
Here's your picture, Mommy. Wesley just got back from Washington, D.C., where he addressed a group on the assassination of Abraham Lincoln and the crime scene. So he's worldly.
I don't know about that. I'm going to try to get through this. I've been coughing all afternoon for some reason, and hopefully I can get through it. If I can't, then we're going to have to get Karen back up here to tell us some more about the Chautauqua. But just about everything that could go wrong today has. My glasses broke, so I have Scotch tape those together. And both they stay together. And like I said, I've been coughing for some reason, and long day at work. But anyway, what I wanted to talk to you about tonight is what I call the battle after the war, which is about the creation of Lincoln Parish a few years after the Civil War, and how it almost caused an insurrection. There were other parishes that were created after the Civil War by the new Republican government that had taken over politics in Louisiana. And in some of those parishes, there were basically insurrections where hundreds of people were killed as those new parishes got started. We never quite got to that point in Lincoln Parish, but we came very, very close. We've got some great resources here at the museum. Like Terry and I did my social studies project at Ruston High School on the Chautauqua here in Ruston. But I only have one source, and that was Mr. Townsend, who was the Ruston High principal, had done his master's thesis on the Chautauqua. And that was the only source I had, because we had no internet, we had no Lincoln Parish Museum. So we've got a great resource here in the museum and the materials that it has available. One of the things it does have is this little book that's called Notes on the History of Lincoln Parish, Louisiana. It was written by Kathleen Graham, and it also appears in what we call the Great Big Blue Book, which is Lincoln Parish History, which if you check eBay every once in a while, you can still find one for about $150 to $200. You know, it was published in 1974, nearly 45 years ago, so they're very hard to find, but there's a lot of great information in here. And Miss Graham's little book is also duplicated in this, and both of these are here at the museum, so they're great resources. I want to just read you a couple of things that she wrote in her book about the creation of the parish, if my glasses stay together, and why we came about having a Lincoln Parish. She writes, "It was not that the people were demanding smaller parishes and parish sites more conveniently located. There may have been some need, but the principal demand was from radical politicians who wanted more offices and more power." Now, before Lincoln Parish was created, really the only town of any significance in this area was Vienna. Well, Vienna was in Jackson Parish. The parish seat of Jackson was Vernon, which was almost a day's ride. So, I mean, if you had business at the courthouse in Vernon, and you lived in what is now the north end of Lincoln Parish, you basically had to take 2 days to go to Vernon to the courthouse to conduct your business. So there was a desire in the community to have another parish so that you didn't have to travel so far. I mean, if you lived at what is now the extreme north end of Lincoln Parish, you would have been in Union Parish, and you would have to go to Farmville to the courthouse, which was also a very long ride. So there was some interest in the community in having another parish. And parishes had been created over time. At one time, Washita Parish pretty much took everything from this area all the way to the Mississippi River, and eventually were broken down into parishes. So there was a need, but what Miss Graham says in her book is really what was happening with the creation of these new parishes after the Civil War were these radical Republicans who controlled all the government in the state were creating more parishes so that they would have more offices they could hold and have more power in the state. Now, you may not know what a radical Republican is. Abraham Lincoln was not a radical Republican. In fact, the radical Republicans, when Lincoln ran for president, were against him, even though he was also a Republican. Radical Republicans were those who wanted complete civil rights for the freed slaves. They wanted them to have the right to vote, full citizenship. Even Abraham Lincoln didn't think that. He thought there ought to be a gradual approach where he was going to free the slaves and then perhaps give the vote to those who could read or had served in the Union Army. But after the Civil War, those radicals took over much of the government in the South with the help of federal troops to back them up. She also writes in her book that Allen Green, a citizen of Vienna, ran for senator of the district composed of Jackson and Union parishes and claimed that he had been elected. That would have been in 1872, a year before Lincoln Parish created. His opponent, E.M. Graham of Vernon, knowing that he had received a large majority of the votes and being urged to do so by many citizens, contested the election, but to no avail, for the carpetbaggers, scalawags, and their followers were in control. What Miss Graham doesn't say is that E.M. Graham, who thought he had won the election, was her father, but she never mentions that in the book. She just says Mr. Graham. But what happened was, as I said, the courthouse was in Vernon, so they were having this election for a state senator for the area that would have covered what is now Jackson and Lincoln Parish. This is in 1872. Judge Graham was running for the state senate spot. The day before the election, this guy named Allen Green, who lived west of Vienna on what we now know as the White Lightning Road, he entered the race the day before the election, and that upset a lot of people. At that time, the African American slaves who had been freed had the right to vote, and Judge Graham thought he won the election. Green said he won the election. Well, they had what was called a returning board in New Orleans that would judge these elections and try to determine if there was any corruption or voting violations or whatever. Well, invariably they always chose the Republican candidate as the one who had actually won the election. So Green became the state senator. His son was already a state representative for Jackson Parish. So they got together and they introduced a law in the legislature in Baton Rouge, or it may have been in New Orleans at that particular time, to create a new parish. And they were going to call it Lincoln Parish to thoroughly upset all the local residents very shortly after the Civil War by naming it after the American president. So his son introduced this law in the legislature. It was passed, created a new parish, and as you can see here, it was created out of 4 surrounding parishes: Union, Claiborne, Bienville, and Jackson. Of course, you have the Washita Parish over here. So, but most of it, say from here up to about right here, was all Jackson Parish. So most of what is now Lincoln Parish was formerly Jackson Parish, which is small parts that were originally part of Union, Claiborne, and Bienville. It was a very contentious election. Just before, the day before the election, as I said, Green entered the race, and that upset a lot of people. And the Vernon newspaper gave a short account of what happened. There was a family in Vernon, the Allen family, who was well-known and prominent family, and this is what the newspaper said. A difficulty occurred here on last Tuesday between Charles Allen, William Allen, and Alan Green and his son Charles Green, which resulted in the shooting of Charles Allen and both of the Greens. Allen was shot first by Alan Green through the left thigh, just above the knee, and through the right leg, breaking the bones of the same and shattering them badly. His wounds were very painful and serious, though not thought to be fatal. Both of the Greens were shot in the head, but their wounds are not considered dangerous. Now, this is the guy, apparently hard heads. But then the next day, the man shot in the head is elected state senator, supposedly. Before they could really kill each other, the Jackson Parish sheriff named James Huey, who was actually from Vienna, and Spencer P. Coven, who was a Jackson Parish constable, managed to arrest all four of them. We really don't know what happened after that because the Jackson Parish courthouse has burned 2 or 3 times since then, so there's no court records available. I doubt anybody was ever prosecuted. But you can see what lengths they were going to capture control of the new parish. Well, when Lincoln Parish was created, there was no election to decide who was going to be the state rep and the parish judge and the clerk of court and all those kinds of things. Alan Green had the governor appoint all those people. Now, the governor didn't know anybody in Vienna, or the new parish, so Green provided him the names conveniently of who he wanted to be in those offices. Of course, he was state senator, so he was representing Lincoln Parish. His son Charles Green, who had been a Jackson Parish state rep, well, once the new parish was formed, their house is out here on White Lightning Road, so he's the state rep for Lincoln Parish. His other son was made tax collector. They needed a sheriff, but they didn't want anybody local, so they went to Washita Parish and got a guy named James Ray. Now, his father was Judge Ray of Washita Parish. Rabel is named after that family, so it was a very prominent Republican family. But they bring him in from Washita Parish to be the Lincoln Parish sheriff. Of course, that upset a lot of folks too, having an outsider, another scalawag. Does anybody know the difference between a scalawag and a carpetbagger? A carpetbagger is in Yankees that come from up north down here to get involved in politics and make a lot of money. The scalawags were considered even worse by the local population because that were local people that they knew and had been their friends who decided to join the Republican Party because, at that time, virtually every white citizen was a Democrat. The African Americans were Republican, probably mainly because Abraham Lincoln was a Republican and had freed the slaves. But there was a very small number of these radical Republicans who were white, and they were the ones in control of the government. So they brought in James Ray. We know not very much at all about him. And in fact, until I did a little research here in the last couple of months, the only thing we knew was he was from Washita Parish. I was able to find out that he had held some law enforcement positions in Washita Parish, so it's not like he was just somebody they snatched off the street to come in here. He did have some law enforcement experience, but he was part of that little group that was controlling Washita Parish politics. And there was a group of people that they seemed to have several government jobs, probably to get one decent salary. You would have somebody that would be a deputy U.S. Marshal, that would also be a parish constable, who would also be a city police officer or something like that, where they held all these different positions. Well, Ray was in charge of the mail on the railroad in Monroe. So, all the mail coming to this part of the country would, at that time, go to Monroe, and then it would have to be put on stagecoach to bring to Vienna because the train ended in Monroe at that particular time. But they had mail that came up missing, mail that was stolen and so forth. So the editor of the Monroe newspaper accused James Ray of stealing the mail. Well, that upset the Ray family, so Ray wanted to defend his honor, so he goes to this editor of the Washita Telegraph, that was the Monroe newspaper, and they have it out. And the editor of the newspaper basically beats him to a pulp. And that was probably a good time to take that job offer in Lincoln Parish. So he leaves Monroe and comes to Lincoln Parish. Of course, all this is upsetting the local populace. The courthouse in Parish seat was supposed to be in Vienna, but there were so many threats on the Greens' lives, they didn't want to leave their home, which they called Greensboro, a big plantation. And like I said, it's on White Lightning Road. If you know where Mitchell Orchard Road comes out on White Lightning, there's a water tower there. It's mostly that land that goes up the hill, and then there's a great big drop off down the big creek. That was their plantation. It was risky for them to go to the courthouse themselves. So they took all the courthouse records to the house. Now imagine if one of our politicians today decided they were going to take all the land records and everything else that's at the courthouse home with them. You know, so people were really getting angry at that point. And they basically told the new sheriff from Washita Parish, Mr. Ray, you better go back home if you value your life. So he didn't last very long at all, just a matter of months. Well, on a number of occasions, armed groups of men had gone to Greensboro and basically surrounded the house and said, we want the records back in the courthouse, we want y'all all to give up your offices. And, you know, basically came to a standoff without any shots being fired on a number of occasions. Eventually, Allen Green wrote a letter to the population. It was basically to the Democratic Party of Lincoln Parish. And I just wanted to read a couple of portions of what he said and what his thought processes were at that particular time. This is just a portion of the letter. He says, the people of a portion of the parish desired the courthouse, the location of the courthouse at Vienna. My son and myself had it placed there. It would have been greatly for our personal advantage to have placed it upon my property at Greensboro, and it was entirely within our power to have it located here. For what we were led to consider the advantage of the people generally, we sacrificed our own interest in the matter. That's how much control they had. They decided who the officials were going to be, where the courthouse was going to be, and so forth. As Republican members of a Republican state government, it was, of course, in our power to control the appointment of whoever we saw fit to office in the new parish. We did actually appoint some Republicans, some Democrats, and some colored men to office, therefore intending to promote good feeling and hoping to unite upon parochial questions all people without distinctions of party. After the organization of the parish and the installation of its officers, its affairs did not work as smoothly as we had reason to hope. Two of the most important officers, the Republican sheriff and the Democratic clerk of court, who was Spencer Cobbin, that I told you had been a constable that had arrested Green in Vernon, were reported to me by the judge of the district court as morally incompetent to discharge the duties of their several offices. I called upon the sheriff to resign, and he did so. Whereupon I caused the appointment of John A. Powell, in whose favor you have addressed me to your committee. Powell was the second sheriff, and he lasted a matter of months too, because it was just all this stuff that was going on as far as the potential for violence was way over his head. Well, as I said, things kept building. People were threatening bodily harm to these office holders. So Allen Green called 911 basically. He called the military for help. Well, the U.S. Marshal in Shreveport, who is also a Republican, issued arrest warrants for all these people that allegedly had threatened the office holders, had intimidated voters, and so forth. So they sent the cavalry from Shreveport over here to round up all these insurrectionists and take them to the federal court in Monroe. Well, the word got here before the cavalry did, so most of those guys went into hiding. But two of the people they arrested was James Huey, who was the former sheriff of Jackson Parish, who, since he lived in Vienna, was now in Lincoln Parish, so he was no longer the Jackson Parish sheriff. And Spencer Cobbin, the former Jackson Parish constable, who eventually became one of Ruston's mayors. Those are two of the people that the cavalry arrested and started towards Monroe. They didn't want to come back the way they had come because they'd already been to Homer and Menden and made arrests there and stirred the people up. And, it was like Paul Revere coming through. People were getting their arms and mounting the horses to take care of the cavalry. So they head towards Monroe, and the lieutenant that's in charge of the cavalry is thinking, those guys are going to telegraph Monroe and tell them we're coming with all these prisoners, and we're going to have a mob waiting for us when we get there. So he sends a trooper up the telegraph pole to cut the telegraph lines. So the people in Vienna cannot warn the people in Monroe that these innocent citizens have been taken prisoner. Well, the local judge, Judge Trimble, who had initially represented Union and Jackson Parish, so he's now representing Union and Lincoln Parish. Judge Trimble, who was also a Republican, but he wasn't a radical, so he identified to some degree with the local Democrats. He issued warrants to arrest the lieutenant of the cavalry troop and the U.S. Marshal. So they go to Monroe to serve these warrants and find the lieutenant and the marshal hiding in the attic of a house. Bring them back and put them in jail in Vienna, while the commanding officer of the cavalry in Shreveport sending telegrams over here saying, don't tell those troopers not to intervene, we don't want a bunch of bloodshed. So anyway, they bring them back and put them in jail and charge them with damage to property for cutting the telegraph lines. And apparently the lieutenant, the cavalry lieutenant, insults the judge, so he finds him in contempt of court. Well, eventually they release them. Of course, they've gotten all the Vienna prisoners have been released and they're back home. The lieutenant's name was Benjamin Hodson, and the only reason that he has any significance at all is that this was the 7th Cavalry, which 2 years later, he and most of those troopers who rode through Vienna were dead at the Little Bighorn. But they almost ended up dead in Lincoln Parish, trying to arrest all these people. One other thing from Alan Green's letter. If my glasses will stay back. This is a letter basically where he's explaining, justifying what they've done in basically taking over the government. At the end of this long letter, trying to explain all this stuff, he says, "It will be apparent to you that what you complain of as wrongs have no existence except in misconceptions of the acts and intentions of Republicans in authority. No one in my family certainly has ever wronged the people of Lincoln Parish or any citizen thereof. Neither has any Republican to my knowledge done so. I cannot see that any real foundation exists for all the resolutions and complaints addressed to me by your committee." So basically he's saying, hey, we won, so we get to decide everything. Well, in 1876, we have a presidential election. We have a new president come in, and it was a disputed election. They couldn't tell who won. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? But it was too close to call, really. So the Southern Democrats said, we'll let you Republicans have the presidency, but you got to pull all these troops out of the South. So when the troops were pulled out, these Republican office holders no longer had any authority behind them to impose their will. So in the election in 1876, all these Lincoln Parish Republican office holders were voted out of office. Allen Green lost his seat, his son lost his seat as the state rep. All the other positions were appointed, really, the clerk of court and so forth at that time. So all of those disappeared. A new sheriff was elected. His name was Edgar Howard. The Howards were really involved in law enforcement for a long time. His son, Eugene Howard, we have his portrait in the front parlor, succeeded him at some point down the road. S.P. Cobbin, as I said, later became a Ruston mayor and also was a quasi-lawman in Ruston. Some of you may have seen that, and I don't think we've got it in here, but there's a photograph that shows the train depot in downtown Ruston with a big crowd of people out in front of it, and there's one man on a horse, and that's D. Cobbin. He had a livery stable where the T.L. James building is now. He was involved in the Chautauqua and the creation of Ruston State Bank and some other things. Excuse me. So the Greens and the Republicans had control for about 4 years until the troops were pulled out, and then once the troops were pulled out, the power and authority in local government reverted back to the Democrats, who had held it for a very long time through the Civil War and until the troops came in. And they held it for a very long time after that. Any questions? Yes,
I do have a couple questions.
easy ones, please.
First of all, the grant papers are at Louisiana Tech University, and there are some correspondence between Graham and Allen Green, which are kind of interesting around this period. Were there any court battles from the other parishes kind of challenging the creation of the parish, and would they not be able to get because they were more democratic parishes, would the judgeships in like Baton Rouge, would those have been more lenient to their cause? And then also, was there, with the creation of the parish, was there kind of an exodus of the population from people who were disgruntled of living in a new parish and didn't want to live in that parish, so they just migrated inward?
I don't know of any controversy with the surrounding parishes. At that time, virtually every parish was controlled by the Republicans at the time that bill was passed in the legislature. They may not have maintained control very long, but I've never read anything about any controversy about taking portions of those other parishes. I have found numerous newspaper accounts where editors praised the creation of another parish on both sides, both Democrat-leaning papers and Republican-leaning parishes or papers, because there was a need logistically as far as having a courthouse that was a little closer than going miles and miles to Vernon. Of course, if you know anything about Vernon, there's nothing there now. The courthouse in that parish moved to Jonesboro many decades after that. Did you have another question?
I do. when the Democrats retook control, was there ever any discussion about renaming the parish? Since it was kind of a controversial naming to begin with, was there any discussion of changing it?
Not that I've ever seen. Of course, we don't have, I mean, Vienna had a newspaper. I think there may be 2 or 3 issues that exist. When Ruston started, there were newspapers, but we don't have but maybe 4 or 5 newspapers prior to 1929 from Ruston. Even though Ruston was created in 1884, there's no newspapers of any consequence before 1929, just a issue here and there. So a lot of what you have to learn about Ruston in the first few decades, what you have to do is go to other newspapers like Monroe and Shreveport and Baton Rouge to read Ruston newspaper articles that were reprinted, which was standard procedure with newspapers back then. They didn't have reporters as such. Most of them were one-man operations where you had an editor and he would get newspapers from other towns in Louisiana, and then he would pick out articles to put in his paper, so he didn't have to write so much himself. Any others? Yes?
I think it's perhaps of interest. I've been told that when they moved the courthouse from Vernon over to Jonesboro, there was a lot of controversy in that too. And I even heard that it really occurred in the middle of the night when a bunch from Jonesboro went down there and got the records and all that took them to Jonesboro.
I've heard that story too, that it was basically a middle of the night affair because there was controversy on where the courthouse would be. And of course, I think there may have been a courthouse that burned in Vernon, and then I know the Jonesboro courthouse burned at least twice, and then there was a natural gas explosion once that totally destroyed the courthouse. So they've gone through a lot of courthouses. Anybody else? This is Alan Green over here, the only known portrait or photograph of him. This is a recreation of his tombstone. He's buried very close to where Greensboro was located, just off the White Lightning Road. And this is the interesting comment here. And I don't know if it's something that he wrote or somebody in the family wrote.
He wrote it himself.
But it says he had a progressive mind and struggled hard to build up his country. But alas, his ideas were far in advance of the community in which he lived. Now, one thing about Miss Graham's book is even though she's really upset that Green beat out her father for the state senate position, she does say that he was a well-liked guy, that he helped out his neighbors. He was the person who started the first African-American schools in Lincoln Parish. He built the road down to the railroad to what he called Allen Green Station, which became the town of Grambling. So he did do a lot of good. There's the impression that, he was out to build his wealth and build his power, but, he lost that very quickly. As I said, once those troops were removed. Well, thank you very much. There's lots of sandwiches back there, so please. I want to just say one other thing. Or did I tell you about my social studies project? Did I mention that? She did a much better job than I did. I didn't even place at Ruston High, much less go to school.
Well, anyway, those that are going to the Dixie can go to the Dixie, but we do have sandwiches if you would like to eat. Thank you so much. We'll do it again in the fall.